du meine Arbeit für richtig hältst, ob du glaubst, dass ich fleißig gewesen bin, dass ich gearbeitet habe, dass ich mich in diesen Jahren für dich eingesetzt habe, dass ich anständig meine Zeit verwendet habe im Dienste meines Volkes. Gib du jetzt deine Stimme ab. Wenn ja, dann tritt für mich ein.
What you are looking at are some of the horrific clips taken during Hitler's rise to power. It is what led to the deadliest war in the history of humanity, World War II, with approximately 75 to 85 million people perished, more than 34 million civilian lives lost, and 17 million deaths as a result of the Holocaust. The reason behind this? Hitler's ideology of fascism. There isn't an exact definition to what it really is. One thing we know for sure is that it was one hell of an excuse for Hitler to gain power. Under fascism, the needs of the state, as determined by the leader, take priority over all else. It assumes that one's own nation is superior to others, producing racist behaviors and religious discrimination. It can even be used to justify the repression of minorities. Totalitarianism is the ultimate goal of fascism, and Germany embraced it more than any other country. That being said, it wasn't the only one. Canada, the supposedly friendliest country in the world, wants to embrace this Nazi movement. Around 40,000 Italians populated Canada during the interwar period. They were predominantly from southern Italy, where an economic depression and overpopulation left many families in poverty. Between the 1950s and the 1960s, around 20,000 to 30,000 Italians immigrated to Canada each year. Italy's fascist government considered all immigrants as Italian citizens, even if they admitted citizenship to another country. This inspired a patriotic feeling for many Italian Canadians and prompted them to promote their Italian identity based on fascist propaganda and culture. This included building the Casa d'Italia in Montreal and supporting the pro-fascist press in Canada both financially and editorially. Some of them didn't even support the movement. Lucy Giovanelli, an Italian Canadian, described her experience attending a bazaar at Mount Carmel Church. People sang the anthem and proceeded to put their hands up in a fascist salute. A Catholic priest, seeing that she had not joined the salute, asked her, "Why don't you have your hand up?" She replied, "I'm in Canada. I don't believe in this business." Fascism was not exclusive to Italian neighborhoods. During the 1920s and 1930s, fascist organizations existed among English, French, and German Canadians. While there was some continuing concern over the assimilation of non-British and non-French immigrants during the 1930s, most Anglo-Canadians were more concerned about protecting their jobs. Prior to the Depression, most Anglo-Saxons were content to have all the foreigners do all the heavy work of construction and the dirty work of janitors and street sweepers. But as the economy slowed down, these jobs became attractive. The pre-Depression attitude was, let the foreigners do all the dirty work, and the Depression attitude became, how come these foreigners have all of our jobs? Those who were primarily targeted were blacks, Chinese, Japanese, and South Asians. The 1930s also saw the high point of anti-Semitism in English-speaking Canada from the patterns of discrimination by fascist groups. The vicious cycle of discrimination became perhaps even more vicious during the 1930s as non-Anglo-Saxons' political response to the Depression further poisoned attitudes towards them. The discrimination and unemployment which non-Anglo-Saxons faced was an important factor in supporting their political solutions to the Depression in fascist movements. The leaders, being predominantly of British origin, prompted the belief that non-Anglo-Saxons were unstable politically. They enforced the idea that non-Anglo-Saxons were in dire need of baptism by assimilation, hence the internment camps. Deportation was also seen as an alternative, and the federal government did not hesitate to use this weapon. The fascist movement was strongest in Quebec with the emergence of Adrien Auquin's National Unity Party. Chuck Crate was the leader of the Canadian Union of Fascists based in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Parti National Social Chrétien was founded in Quebec in February 1934 by Adrien Auquin. It eventually merged with the Canadian Nationalist Party, which was based in the Prairie provinces. In June 1938, it merged with Nazi groups from Ontario and Quebec, many of which were known as swastika clubs, to form the National Unity Party. There were parades for the resentment of foreigners in Toronto and praising of the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis in Germany in 1933. From 1946 to 1948, a ragtag band of Nazi collaborators, French for the most part, arrived in Montreal. In the Montreal area, the doors of the best houses in Entremont and Westmont flung open to the Nazi collaborators. They were even acclaimed as the real heroes of the war. In 1921, the Ku Klux Klan was reported active in Montreal, and by 1925, the clans, or local branches, had been established all across Canada. Quebec was an important influence on the government's policy. Quebec was opposed to all immigration because it felt that its influence in Confederation would be undermined. And since Jews, at the time, were the most visible of the minorities allowed into Canada, Quebec led the campaign against Jewish immigration. William Lyon Mackenzie King, the Prime Minister at the time, turned away a ship of 900 Jewish refugees. With the United States and Canada denying the passengers safe haven, the ship was forced to return to Europe, and 254 of the refugees later died in Nazi concentration camps. Mackenzie King's diary shows his sympathy for the racial ideas emanating from Nazi Germany. He feared too great an intermixture of foreign strains of blood. Not to mention, fascist concepts and policies, such as eugenics, formulated in the US, found a friendly reception in Canada in some provinces, such as Alberta, where under a social credit government, alleged mental defectives and non-producers were involuntarily sterilized to prevent the birth of more similar people. Tommy Douglas, Premier of Saskatchewan, wrote his 1933 master thesis paper endorsing some of the ideas of eugenics. Alcan and his members of the National Unity Party were interned during World War II. Italian fascists were also interned, even those who did not have malevolent intentions. The Casa d'Italia was raided and shut down by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who confiscated the building and used it as a base of operations. Hundreds of Italian Canadians were sent to internment camps. They were left to suffer the consequences of a sweeping crackdown by the federal government. As a result, many stopped speaking Italian and anglicized their names. Canada, to this day, has never officially apologized for the internment of Italian Canadians. Fascism in Canada gave rise to hatred amongst Canadians, and racism divided the country in a similar fashion to the Indigenous peoples. Adrien Alcan, being one of the first Canadian influencer of fascism influenced by Hitler, described himself as the Canadian Führer. This is the dark side of Canada we want to avoid listening about. We want to forget about it like it never happened. The movement had immensely impacted Canada, continuing to impact contemporary Canadian society. Many new fascist organizations emerged in the late 1960s and early 1970s, and continued to be very active through the 1980s and 1990s. Among the most prominent of these are the Heritage Front, the Western Guard, the Aryan Nations, the Nationalist Party, and the expansion of the KKK. Hatred still continues to divide some of those in Quebec. Fear towards certain groups of people, a political tactic Hitler once used, has once again emerged among Canadians. And there's a word for it. It's called xenophobia. We can't forget how Quebec passed legislation banning many civil servants from wearing religious symbols last year, and passed a ban on niqab-wearing women from accessing some social services. This is an example of popular white supremacism, the idea that people of other racial, ethnic, or cultural backgrounds are inherently dangerous and should not mix with the old stock Canadian. We must fight this urge to move backwards. We should continue to be more inclusive, and that will truly make Canada great, if not again. And now I have a question for you folks. As I have mentioned earlier, hundreds of Italian immigrants were sent to internment camps due to their homeland being an ally of Germany, our enemy. Was Canada wrong for this? Were we protecting our country in a time of war? Many people, including some Italian Canadians, believe it was needed to have been done. Although no Italian was subsequently charged with espionage, there is no doubt that Italian consulates in Toronto and Montreal were spreading propaganda with elite Italian Canadians in support of Mussolini's fascist government. In the mid-1930s, in fact, money was raised to help Italy's invasion of Ethiopia. Some doubt its morality. Italians didn't become patriotic Canadians as soon as they reached our shores, barely speaking any English and with most of their families still back home. It's only natural for Italy to continue to be a place in their hearts. Many did not intend for the violence that a war brings, even if Canadian authorities had no way of knowing how strong their loyalties were to Canada. Was it necessary to send that many people to camp? What do you think?